Jesus makes the biggest difference in our lives. He makes the biggest difference in our deaths. It was this week 5 years ago, I had one of those phone journal memories pop up for me this week, that I sat across the table from my father-in-law Wayne. He had come to the end of his cancer treatment. The doctors had said there's no more that we can do. It's time to say your goodbyes. It was a very sad moment. It was just me and him, early 60s. He'd been in my life since I was 18. But there was something distressing me far more than just time cut a little short. And I looked over the table and I said, Wayne, you're about to meet your maker. How do you think that's going to go for you? And he paused and paused and paused. And he said, I'm terrified. Terrified. He had death just on the other side of his nose. He knew he was about to stand before his maker, and he had no confidence that God would welcome him into his heaven. I said, let me read this part of the Bible I've just read this morning, and went to Luke chapter 18 with him. Some of Jesus' teaching, it's up here for us. And we read, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The equivalent of a middle-class church-going good guy is the Pharisee, tax collector the scumbag. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. We talked about this some more, and about a week later I went back to visit Wayne, and I walked through the door and he jumped straight on top of me and he said, I'm that man. I said, what man? I'm that man. I'm the tax collector. I'm a sinner, but I have cried out to God for mercy and I trust Jesus. A couple of weeks later, I was preaching Luke 18 at his funeral, able to declare the most wonderful gift that anyone could receive, that Wayne had received in the nick of time. And in the wonder of God, I wasn't just preaching to the room, I was actually preaching into every maximum security prison in New South Wales, which was live streaming the funeral. Wayne had worked for them a long time. The Lord works in amazing ways and has the most amazing gift on offer to all, which is what I want to push into this morning, because Jesus makes a big difference in our lives, but the biggest difference in our deaths. And church needs to keep talking about our deaths, because you're not going to hear about it anywhere else, right? You'll be able to go around today and hear about the cricket, and for good reason. What a game, wow. Actually, only 4 of you care about cricket, and you all texted me last night. We've done our thing. This is the only place that is going to lift our gaze to eternity. And this morning, we're going to look at Romans chapter 3 that we're up to, that zooms in on the gift of being able to go home justified before God. Not just go home to Erina, but go home into eternity justified with God. This part of the Bible takes us under the bonnet of Jesus' short parable in Luke 18 to explain the detail on what the gift is, how the gift works, and how you can have it. These are the steps that we'll take through this passage. What it is, how it works, and how you can have it. And just a little heads up, to do that, we're going to have to do some work. We're going to have to work hard. And I'm going to deal with a little bit of Greek for you. After all, it is plastered all over our stage, right? So the original was written in the language of Greek, and it's one of those parts of the Bible where it's helpful to just uncover some of that at points. So number one, what is this gift in a word? Righteousness. Righteousness. That word appears 7 times in this short passage. I've put it in bold there for you. And it can sometimes be hard for us to see in the English translation, but actually behind the English is the same root word anyway of righteous. So you see it there in 21, the righteousness of God. 22, the righteousness given. 24, all are righteousified. It's not a proper English word, but what's going on there? God's demonstrating his righteousness. His righteousness is to be righteous. He's to righteify. This passage is about righteousness. And we see there, verse 21, it's about the righteousness of God. At the very centre of the Bible is God. Now, we would love to think that we would be at the centre. That's part of the problem. But it's about God, and it's about who he is, and it's about what he gives. There's 2 dimensions of God's righteousness here. We see verse 22, it includes a gift. This righteousness, God's righteousness, is given. It's gifted. It's a righteousness that is given from God. Verse 24 is the next use of that righteous word. All are justified or righteousified freely by his grace. This passage trades on the context of a courtroom, a legal setting. Someone's facing trial, they've come before the judge, the evidence has been presented, and a judge is declaring a verdict. That's the language that this passage is trading on. Well, the courtroom is a heavenly one, and the judge is God himself. And the person on trial? Well, in one sense, it's every human being, and in another sense, it's a select human being. You'll see what I mean. This gift is for a person to be declared righteous by God in that heavenly courtroom. On that day that you die and you stand before him and the books are opened, the court is held, and you hear the verdict, righteous from God. There is no higher court. Righteous. But why is that a gift? Why would the declaration of righteousness be a gift? I mean, imagine if you were brought before the courts, charged with a crime that you did not commit. You are innocent. And all of the evidence points to you being innocent. And you get to the end and the judge announces you are righteous, you are innocent. You don't thank the judge for a gift. That's not a gift, that's just justice. Which is what makes God's declaration of righteous so shocking. Like the twist at the end of Jesus' parable, where it's the sinful tax collector who goes home righteous before God. This is shocking if you've been with us on the journey in the previous chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, and half of 3, where Paul has been prosecuting the case that all humanity stand under the wrath of God, stand ready to come before him and on account of their lives have the verdict guilty with no wriggle room. Not even one. Chapter 1, verse 18. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people. Chapter 2, verse 5. People are storing up wrath against themselves for the day of God's wrath, a day of accounting and judgment. Not one person will be able to wriggle out of this verdict. Not the person who never heard the Bible, the Gentile, for they suppressed the truth that God had made known to them. They disobeyed the law that God had written on their heart. And not the person who had the Bible, the Jews, for the law showed how far short they fell from keeping it. So that we arrived at the conclusion that no one will be declared righteous in God's sight, verse 20, not according to works of the law. And he gives a summary statement in our passage, chapter 3, verse 22. He's summarising everything he's said prior to this. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And literally there, all keep sinning and continue to fall short of the glory of God. This is not one little slip-up. One of the reasons we find it so hard to own that identity that the Bible is giving us here as sinners is that we find it so hard to take responsibility for our sin. We live in a culture that puts a big emphasis on victimhood, so that the wrong things that we do are the consequences of the wrong things that have been done to us. And of course there can be truth to this, but we just find it so hard to take responsibility to put ourselves in that identity, sinner. That was me. You see this in your kids, don't you? The kid hits the other kid because they took my Lego. It was their fault, they made me do it. Which is why it always stuck with me and stood out to me that one of my sons especially, he did a really good job of actually taking responsibility for his sin. There was one time, I've got two boys, they're close in age, they share a room. They're young and I hear crying in the bedroom. And younger brother comes out and complains to me that bigger brother hit me. And so I go in to deal with the situation, deal with the bigger brother. Why did you hit your younger brother? And he goes, I didn't hit him, I punched him. And I did find myself, well, you're taking responsibility for what you've done. Let's deal with the issue there. And he's actually been very good at owning his sin. It's not something that comes naturally, though. We want to duck and weave and excuse it. We struggle to take responsibility to find ourselves as the people the Bible is describing here, the seriousness of sin. See, the thing that gives sin its greatest stench is not the hurtful consequences that follow for others and ourselves. That's not what makes sin so dreadful. The stench of death about our sin is that it is against the eternal, almighty, holy God of the universe. It's personal. It's personal against him. If you know your Bible, do you remember Psalm 51? King David, king of Israel, who has just been confronted about his adultery that he's committed, and it's a psalm of confession, of repentance. And he has the nerve to say in it, against you only, God, have I sinned. And you're left going, hang on, David. You've sinned against Bathsheba as you took her for sex. You've sinned against her husband as you had him murdered. You've sinned against the child that was conceived. You sinned against your family that spiraled out of control from this act. You sinned against all the people as you represented them as king. Who haven't you sinned against? And yet he rightly recognises the greatness of God over his creatures and can say, against you only have I sinned. Our greatest problem is not relationship breakdown, loneliness, physical health, mental health, global warming, global politics, all the things. That is not our greatest problem. That is what the last few chapters have been trying to drum home. Our greatest problem is that each one of us has rebelled against a holy God. A just God, a just judge that we will stand before and give an account of our lives, and he will declare a just verdict. Which is why, as I said to Wayne, how do you think that's going to go for you? He rightly said, I'm terrified. which is why we naturally live under the wrath of God. We will die to face that wrath of God. Wrath not just being a divine dummy spirit. It's not a divine dummy spirit. We think of anger in that way, but it is the measured opposition to evil. It is the only just response to it. And it awaits each one of us according to our lives. And so the greatest gift we could possibly have on that day upon our deaths is the gift of righteousness. Righteousness, to be declared righteous. But on what possible grounds can a just God do this? Which brings us to the second point. How does this gift work? The first thing to notice there, and it's very important because it's all about God, it's the source, it's the well of this gift. It's in there, verse 24. All are justified, righteousified freely by his grace. This gift of righteousness comes freely by God's grace. It's a gracious gift. Now, Christmas vibes are well and truly in the air, aren't they? As you get onto your gift buying, it's so much easier with online shopping now, isn't it? Who does the last minute stress thing anymore? It's just click, 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 done. We, in my home for my kids, Santa never showed up. There must have been a glitch in the system. He didn't get our address. We never had Santa show up for our kids. And I know many of you will think I'm the Grinch. I get it. That's fine. One of the reasons we never did it is I didn't want to give the credit to another person for giving these great gifts to my kids, right? I'd worked hard for them. But seriously, one of the real reasons there wasn't Santa in our house is I wanted the gifts to be gifts, to be as much a gift as a gift can be, and not dependent on a contract. Have you been naughty or nice? You tell someone, well, you'll get something if you are nice. That taints the gift, isn't it? That's not a gift, that's a contractual obligation. But regardless of how you've been, let me give you this. That's a gift, that's a free gift. You work a hard week of work and you get your paycheck. You're not going to your boss, thank you so much for the gift of my wages. No, they owe them to you. You worked for them. That's the point Paul's going to make in chapter 4. And so there is something radically different about this righteousness that you can stand before God on that last day with. You didn't earn it or deserve it one little bit. Or it wouldn't be a gift. It would be something God owed. But it comes according to his free grace. Completely, totally according to his pleasure to give it freely, graciously, to whoever he likes. Which speaks to a common objection I hear. How can God be just by giving salvation to just some and not all? How can a just God do that? And the answer is, will he be just to condemn all and give the gift to none? So that he freely chooses it to give to whoever he likes. He is sovereign and free. But there's actually a much more valid objection that needs answering. On what grounds can God give this gift of righteousness? Haven't you been saying that all the chapters have been pointing about how guilty we are and how just God is, and you're saying you can die and stand before him and he can say, righteous? On what grounds? That's a good question. And that's what this passage is drilling in to make plain. It's the wonder of verse 25. It's at the center of this passage which is the center of this letter, which is the heartbeat of the Bible. You ready for it? The very center of all reality. Verse 25, God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood. There it is. That's a very thick statement that needs unpacking. What is a sacrifice of atonement? That's what God has presented Christ as. What is that? Well, sacrifice of atonement is an English translation of a word that is trying to get across a sense of another word that we find hard to understand. It's the word propitiation. So our translations they're looking for what English words will help us make. I don't think we understand what a sacrifice of atonement is, so we may as well talk about the word we find hard to understand, propitiation. I've put it up there. This is literally how it would read. God presented Christ as a propitiation through the shedding of his blood. If we're going to explain a term, we may as well explain the original term there. Propitiation, what is that? I'm sure it's not a word that you use in your everyday speak. In fact, no day speak, right? To illustrate it, many years ago, before Brie and I were married, we were in a car accident. It was early in the morning. There was lots of traffic banked up East Gosford there. We were just stopped in traffic. And a ute slammed into the back of us. He didn't even stop. No brake, didn't see us. And so there was this massive impact. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt. But Bree's little hatchback, total write-off. Guy gets out of the car, there's all that shock. Once that settles down, it becomes clear that he's very worried. Don't ring the police. And he has no insurance. He has no money, he tells us, to be able to pay for any repairs. We have a problem. He is completely in the wrong. We have been wrong. We got no car. He's got no money. He goes, I'm sorry. I'm just so sorry, okay? And tries to walk off. Mate, sorry isn't good enough. Yes? You have wronged me. Sorry doesn't fix the car. And so what we ended up doing, he was a chippy, and so Brie was still living at home. He came to an arrangement with my parents-in-law to do some carpentry work on their house to the value of the car. The point is, our anger against him remained, and we needed to be propitiated. He needed to propitiate us. We needed to be made favourable to him again. He needed to pay a cost to propitiate. And so in this example, his carpentry was the cost, was the price paid to propitiate us to come back to friendly terms again. That is the death of Jesus on the cross. That historical event which has changed the world forever. Jesus, we read, is presented as the propitiation. He is the propitiation for our sins. The shedding of his blood, it's referring to his death there. But notice this, who is he propitiating? Well, given all the previous chapters, he is propitiating God. Who is the one who has been wronged? God. In his death, he is dying as a substitute to remove God's anger and make God favourable again to the sinner. It's no good us just coming to God going, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Isn't sorry enough? And a just God says, no. The death of Jesus is what God goes and does to bring about a change in God's stance towards us. So that he might no longer stand over us in judgment, but to be able to welcome us in friendship. Friends, this is taking us to the very centre of the purposes of God. The cross of Jesus, which begs a common question, but how can one man's death count for another, let alone all? which is why the identity of this man dying to be the propitiation for sins is just so important and just mind-blowing. That the eternal God, the God who is spirit, eternal, the God who has made all things, Father, Son, and Spirit, would put on flesh, the Son would put on flesh to come and live in the world that he made. That this one who would go to his death on a cross under the wrath of God is God. God himself, God the Son. Which means this, it's God who propitiates God. It's God who is making a way for God to no longer hold wrath over sinners. The one who had been wronged by them. Catch this. The God who has been wronged by sinners, the one who is rightly angry with every one of us, sends his Son, Jesus Christ, to substitute himself with those sinners. Who does that? No one does that. Oh, you might see some examples which are reflective of that. But who goes to the lengths to suffer eternal wrath in the person of the Son except, friends, the one true God? This is the wonder of the Christian message. It is the great exchange, where the guilt of my godlessness and my wickedness is counted as Christ's. And he stands with it counted as his and is destroyed under the just judgment for it. Which is where the life of Christ is so significant. Who he is and how he has lived a perfect life becomes so significant because it gets counted, it gets declared as mine, righteous, perfect in God's sight. Why? When you get to the bottom of it, why has God done this? Well, we see here it's because he has been pleased to give a free gift. There's nothing that has happened in us or in any circumstances that has twisted his arm. There's nothing cute or cuddly about us. It is completely free and undeserved. So why? Well, in just a couple of chapters, chapter 5, verse 8, Paul will take us to the depths of why God demonstrates his love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Have you ever wondered, does God love me? I know you have. Pretty much everyone does. Does God love me? And the clearest answer that the Bible gives us is, have a look at this man dying on the cross. The Son of God in your place, he loves you and has done everything necessary to satisfy justice, the punishment paid in his Son. You know, in Luke 18, when the tax collector cries out for mercy, literally, as you read the Greek, he cries out, God, be propitious toward me. That word isn't used very often in the New Testament. The idea is, but Jesus anticipates it as he puts the word on the lips of a scumbag sinner. Because his point is, the God of love is so pleased to answer that cry. And Romans chapter 3 takes us under the surface to show us why God can justly justify. Because the punishment has been paid, not swept under the carpet. He just paid it himself. So how do you have this gift? Well, it is repeated and underlined through this passage. Let me draw it out briefly because we're going to spend more time next week. Paul does in chapter 4. This righteousness, this gift of standing there on that day before this God declared right, is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. It's to be received by faith, verse 25. God justifies, verse 26, those who have faith in Jesus. You get this gift by faith alone. Faith can be very misunderstood as we talk about it in our communities. Typically, I find thought of like a substance that religious people have. You know, like an athlete is born with speed and agility. An artist is born with creativity and flair. And a religious person, well, they're born with faith. Good for you. That is not what the Bible means when it speaks of faith. A much sharper way of saying it for our ears is to substitute the word faith for trust. This righteousness is given through trust in Jesus to all who trust. It's to be received by trust. God justifies those who trust in Jesus. That's sharper for us because it makes you realise this is not a substance in us that some people have, some people don't. This is something outside of us, the person of Jesus, and it is a call to embrace Him, to reach out from anything in your life to everything in Him and embrace Him. The other week I took one of my boys camping at Fraser Beach, just up the coast there in the national park. If you know it, you'll know it's renowned for lots of drownings, actually. It's a really dangerous part of the ocean. And that's testified to by there's monuments of people who have drowned, and there's huge orange life buoys on the rocks each side of the beach. Imagine you're out there. You've been sucked out by a powerful rip. You are exhausted. You know you are not getting out of this. You are going down. You are drowning. And someone comes paddling out over the wave with one of these big red life buoys. And they throw it to you. At that moment, your only choice is, well, surely your thought process isn't, why did they paint it orange? There's a shade of yellow that I think would be brighter. Why is it round? Would a square work just as well? How does the physics work? You're not thinking any of that. You understand enough to know my only hope is to cling onto that life buoy. Nothing about you. All that has been brought to you, friends, that is faith in Jesus. Looking to Jesus who has come from heaven to rescue you. Trusting that He is the propitiation that God presented to Himself. The one who has exchanged places with you. He really did that 2,000 years ago. That He did that so that you might never need to fear the coming wrath of God. That's why it makes a massive difference to our lives every day. Complete confidence that God is smiling on you. That'll change your life. It'll change your eternity. On that day when you come to stand before Him and hear those words, righteous. Do you have this gift? Have you received it? Can you go home today confident that you are justified before God? Because you can be. And I'm going to invite you to be if you don't have that confidence. Because it's possible that you've been here for some time, but you've actually had your trust in other places if you were to drill down. If I were to ask you that question with death on the other side of your nose, how's it going to go for you? You might go, I'm actually really scared. Not just of the death, but I'm scared of how it's going to go with God. I'm not sure. That's an evidence that you've had your trust elsewhere. Typically in yourself, what you've done, and you're very aware it's not going to be enough. Or it's possible you've been around, you're like, yeah, but I've got doubts, I haven't got to the bottom of understanding all of this. Sure, you need to adequately come to understand. But are you quibbling over the colour of the life buoy? You might think, man, if you knew my life, Jez, it is a mess. And I'm trying, I've come to church to clean it up and turn it around, and I'm heading to... It's the scumbag tax collector who goes home justified, beating their breast. Have mercy on me, God, a sinner. Don't wait. You'll never get there. In fact, I want to give you the opportunity right now to receive this gift, to put your trust in Jesus. I'm going to say a very short prayer that you might repeat in the quietness of your heart. Lord God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I see your mercy provided in the death of Jesus. I trust in him. Give me the gift of going home justified. And if you would hear Jesus' words, remember Luke 18? He says, that's exactly what is true for you. For the rest of us, just very quickly, for those of us who have cried out in mercy, have seen the provision of God's mercy in Christ, what do we do with this? Well, so much, of course. Let me give you the first implication or application that follows in the next verse, verse 27. Where then is boasting? Aussies hate boasters, don't we? We are quick to cut them down. Pull your head in, mate. Who do you think you are? And then we go away and boast on social media about da-da-da-da. The true antidote to the ugliness of boasting, of look at I am what I've, is the cross of Christ. How can I boast about anything good in me when it was my sin that put the Son of God on that cross under the wrath of God? How can I make much of what I've achieved when he left his throne to exchange the glory for the most horrific death for me? The big thing for those of us who have done this that I might leave you that Paul does in verse 27, where then is boasting, is humility. And to remain humble. There is nothing we have to boast about except the mercy of God that he has lovingly showered on us, has exchanged places to take the wrath that you deserve. I'm going to invite Arami and Nao out, who are going to help us respond to the wonders of these truths with a beautiful song. Someone has said, well, words make you think a thought. Music makes you feel a feeling. A song makes you feel a thought. And so the gift of song from God with these wonderful truths, I'd invite you to, a new song maybe to you, to sit back and just take those words in. I invite you to place yourself in the song, if that is you and you are able. And then a little later, these guys will invite us to add our voices as we remain seated.